everybody, Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the extraordinary honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist for the Black Moods, Jordan Hoffman.
Hello.
Yay! Jordan, so excited to talk to you. You guys have a new album that's just dropped just 4 days ago as of this time that we're speaking, and we're definitely going to talk about that, but we always like to go back to the past. How did you get started in music and particularly on bass?
I started playing music back in the year, I guess it was 2001. I was 10 years old. Yeah, my dad played guitar and his dad before him. And they used to play in bands and things like that. My dad was in tons of bands growing up as a kid and, in his late 20s and things like that. And then we happened. I have two older brothers and an older sister, so I think that kind of put a halt to his music playing. Until at least we were old enough to hold a guitar and hold a tune. So, I have him to thank for pretty much everything because my mom sings. My mom is a wonderful person and she definitely helped us sing as well. But she helped by not yelling at him, I guess. But one day, I'll tell you a little story. One time, we were growing up, we were very middle class, lower middle class, didn't have a lot of money. But my dad came home. He worked a few different jobs. So did my mom. He came home one day and he said, "So if you wanted to play an instrument, what instrument would it be?" He asked me and my brothers, and my oldest brother was like, "I want to play drums." And my middle brother, Micah, wanted to play guitar. And I was like, "Well, I want to play drums, but I feel like if I choose bass, then we can all be in a band together." Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened. So I chose bass and I was like, "All right, I'll choose it, I'll see what happens." Sure enough, Christmas comes around that year and he bought us all instruments. He bought us a big PA system so we can all practice in the basement. Drums, guitar, amps, everything, you name it, we had it. And we started our band. My dad played lead guitar, Micah played rhythm guitar, I played bass, Mark played drums. So then we got one of our cousins, Danny, to sing for us. That was the first edition of the band was that. And our wheels were turning, and we were off. That was back in 2000. Man, I'll tell you what, I haven't really stopped ever since. I was one of those kids I used to play sports. I was a jock, during that time between elementary, junior high, and the very beginning of high school, I went from really into sports to I figured out who AC/DC was. Yeah. Led Zeppelin, Aerosmith, Alice in Chains, Nirvana. I went down this wormhole, as you can imagine. I'm sure you did too. And I just, every day after school, I would come home every day and play guitar and play bass, play drums. And I just would rotate, and just figure things out and just listen. I didn't really take lessons, but that's how it started for me.
Nice. And so you're pretty much self-taught?
Yeah, self-taught. I didn't take any lessons until I was in high school. When I was in high school, I did choir. I sang in choir and I played in various different kinds of bands, and that taught me how to sight read music. Okay. So I learned a bit of theory from the choral side of things, actually singing with 4, 5, 8-part harmonies and things like that in choruses and choirs. And mm-hmm. I did that for a while, actually. I really enjoyed singing and harmonizing with people. And believe it or not, I was actually in Barbershop quartet. I was in a quartet with 3 other guys, and it was learning how to sing like that helped my ear really, really well. Because I was able to really break down those parts individually, the bass, the baritone, the tenor, and the lead part of 4-part harmony. When you're singing your own part, it really breaks it down for you. So you can kind of start to hear all the elements and how they work together. Mm-hmm. And then you can bring that into other instruments too. Like if you're playing in a band instead of singing together, you can't always singing or playing the same part at the same time, and it just sounds like a mess. Yeah. You have to feed off of each other, and it's a rhythm and a flow, It's all about that.
Well, it does certainly help you develop the dynamic relationship with the other parts and the other musicians. And definitely there's no shame, I'll say, in Barbershop, because I can think of at least a couple of instances. Well, Huey Lewis, they did a Barbershop rendition. Van Halen, I think they had a Happy Trails,
Yeah.
kind of more of the vocal barbershop kind of
Oh
approach.
yeah, and then yeah, you got the Seven Bridges Road by the Eagles.
Oh
You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Like
There's
the acapella singing. I mean, it gives me goosebumps. Like thinking about it. You know what I mean? There's something that happens when you get like four or five guys or people in a room singing together, and it's like weird how
yeah,
the harmonies literally create these vibrations around you, and it's like it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild.
absolutely, absolutely. And the Black Moods, how did that come about?
So, years after me, like switching instruments and learning how to play bass, I really figured out the instrument that I wanted through bass was, after high school, I got super into the Chili Peppers and bass players like that, you know what I mean? Like Flea, like how can you not, as a bass player, like how can you not be intrigued? You find a bass player who just does whatever he wants to do instead of just playing the bass line. You're like, wait a minute, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I kind of followed that approach and started learning and jamming a lot more, like with my friends. So that's how I really came back and like started playing a lot. And then after high school, I moved to Los Angeles to basically do it, as they say. Me and my friend Matt, he went out there for film school, and I was like, all right. I didn't really want to go. Didn't think I had enough money to go. And I was like, well, I guess now was a better time than ever to go, just pack up my things and just see what happens. So at that time I was 20, turning 21 in about a month. I think it was 2012 was the year. And I moved to LA, and I worked my I worked my butt off, man. I mean, I worked as much as I could to pay rent. I worked two jobs. I played in two or three different bands, ranging from rock and roll bands, cover bands, to I played in a live hip hop band, which was awesome. And it really helped me grow as a bass player, because playing with so many different artists in such a big city, I was always busy, always working through places like the Viper Room, like the Sunset Jam. Like I have to thank them a lot, because that was one of those scenes where as soon as we got involved with that, like this whole networking thing happened. And that's really what that boils down to. The situation between me and the Black Moons is it's who you know. It really kind of is. If you don't put yourself out there, you're never going to meet anybody. You're never going to learn. You're never going to grow as a player, as a person. So I was out there like every day, before work, after work. I was playing as much as I could play, as much as they let me play. And I played in a band called Fire as well out there in LA. But during that time, it was about 2016, 2017, and I was playing in a band called Fire and a couple other bands, and things were going well. Things were great. I was working constantly, making a bunch of money, playing shows, and I started seeing this kind of upswing in LA, because for many years it was very, very harsh. That the mentality that you have to really work to make it out there. You can't just sit around and expect things to just fall in your lap. People think that happens. You go out there and you get lucky. It's not like that. So, long story longer, I'm in a band called Fire, and my drummer, his name was Richard Bradley, and he got us a gig opening up for this band called Black Moons in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Okay.
Sometime in, 2016, because he knew these guys. So we play a show, we come back to LA, we continue our thing for about a year. And meanwhile, networking with all these same people that we all know. As you kind of get in the circle, it starts to get smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are, a year after that show, I get a phone call from my roommate, who is also a mutual friend from other bass players, other producers. Jim Kaufman was another key instrument in all this. They call the Black Moods I'm talking about. They call our producer, Jim Kaufman, who I knew, and then called Dan Curcio, which was my roommate. And I'm on a flight to Detroit and from LA, and he's like, hey, this band needs a bass player, and I can't do it. I'm too busy. But I was wondering if you wanted to audition for him, go out and see if you'd like it. And I was like, well, I'm already in a band, but I'll see, if I like it. I knew who they were. I was like, yeah, I know who the Black Moods are.
Yeah.
So I was pretty excited because did like their music. I actually had a couple of their albums before that happened. So I tried to contain my excitement a little bit, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll see what happens." You know what I mean? And then like 2 days later, not even, I think it was like the next day, I get a phone call from Chico and Josh, and they were like, "Do you want to audition? We'll fly you out here. In a few weeks, we'll send you 15, 18 songs, and we'll go over every song and see how it flows. Practice for a couple of days and see if it's good." So I was like, "Okay, cool." So I did. And they had a little pre-interview for me. That was part of it. And they said, are you married? I said, no. They were like, good. Do you have any kids? I said, no. And they were like, do you like to drink beer and play music? I said, yes, let's do this. So I fly out there. I auditioned in September of 17, I guess it was. And we went through every single song, 17, 18 songs. And after the last song, we had 2 days scheduled for like this tryout audition, and it was an hour and a half in, and they were like, "So, what do you want to do now? Do you want to join?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do this."
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So that's pretty much how it happened. I mean, really, I went back to LA after a couple of days in Phoenix, and Chico called me and he said, we're going to have you move to Phoenix. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that, but I did. And I haven't looked back. Everything's been good. I don't know if I'd move back to LA in this climate right now. Like with everything, I don't think you really need to be there anymore.
Yeah. Well, and it's very interesting, you mentioned networking, because that kind of communication and establishing a reputation for being a good person to work with and having people that will kind of vouch for you, because all of these things kind of click. And you're right. It's not just you sit around and wait for something to happen and then by accident it somehow does. There's a bit of hustle that has to go with it. And there has to be that blending. And with so many bands, I've talked to so many groups that are like, especially when you're on the road and you're in a tour bus and you're together 24 hours a day, of which 1 hour is on stage and the other 23 are off. There has to be so much more in order to kind of be able to stand each other,
100%. 100%. I mean, that's a huge key. And we've probably talked about it in some of our other interviews as well. That's a big thing. Like, you can be one of the best drummers or best bass players or whatever, vocalists around. But man, I'll tell you what, if you're a jerk and, you don't do your homework, like there's simple things. Like if you're not prepared for songs, you're not prepared for tour, you're not a nice person to deal with on the road. Mm-hmm. No one wants to be around that person. So no one's going to hire you. You know what I mean? It's tough. You have to really keep a focus on that. You know what I mean? Not just being a good player, but being a good person.
Absolutely. Well, and as we move ahead into the night, again, just dropped, really hard charging album, lots of very tasty bass licks in there.
Thank you.
I find you to be what I consider a very harmonious melodic player, in that the way you are adorning the songs, I wouldn't know that there was ever Black Moods without you, because the blend is so enmeshed there, and it's so complementary. It's kind of the way, again, a lot of times when we hear music like food, you go, what does this taste like? Oh, it tastes like chicken, kind of thing. Well, as I'm listening to your playing, I get kind of a lot of kind of McCartney kind of sound, the way he complemented Beatles music with some of the melodic runs, that you're just going, oh, wow, that was there. That just did that. Whoa. I'm like, whoa. Yeah, that's sweet. So tell us a little bit about the album.
Well, the album was a huge, one of my best works that I think that we've all done collectively as a group, I feel anyways, because we really spent time working on it. We went, after COVID hit, we took our studio, we went to Missouri for 3 or 4 months, and we spent that time writing and perfecting the songs that we already had written. So and then we recorded those songs. So, I mean, we really took our time diving into the lyrics, the melodies, the drum patterns, everything kind of mattered. And because of that, thank you for your compliments, by the way, but those bass licks, those little melody things that I've added to certain songs, like Junkie Excuses and, you know, little licks in Saturday Night that I do, they complement the lyrics. And people, I think, lose sight of that when they play music. It's always has to be about, well, what are you talking about?
Sure.
And the music is there, and I love instrumental music, but if there are lyrics, the lyrics to me are like up top. And then you have the guitar and the bass and the drums and things that layer it up, right? Like a pyramid. So to me, like when the verse is happening, it's not my place to be playing a million notes, right?
Yeah.
But like if you say something very cool in the middle of the verse, or you're singing, and I'm playing a little part in between your break, it's like call and response. You say something, and I'm like, ooh, doo 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 doo.
Yeah.
And then you say something, and I'm like, ooh, doo 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 doo. You know, there's a little bit of a call and a question and answer and call and response, and that's what you said. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because McCartney did that, and I mean, obviously, I love the Beatles. So
who doesn't?
Right. So, but he did that, and a lot of basses, like that's what bass, you know, the leading notes and like those things matter in how the mood changes and where you're going with the song. So those notes that you're going to, they matter, you know, and not playing too much, like accenting the drums when it's necessary and the lyrics when it's necessary, and, you know, playing to make somebody feel something instead of like, you know, to impress somebody, you know?
Oh, totally. Well, and the thing is, you're three people. And so there's a lot of space. And so finding how you want to, it's not uncommon for people to try to overcompensate for the fact that there's not more folks there. And so there's a delicate balance, but one of the most stable positions is like a 3-point, you think of a stool, you know, your 3-legged stool is a very stable kind of thing. And so the balance between the drums, the bass, the guitar, and I'm going to guess you sing as well, because with your background in choir, the vocals, there's great harmonies. So all of this is happening simultaneously. It's a very full complement. So it's not way too much. It's got a really nice balance of everything. And again, there's still space for those little riffs and runs to kind of pop. And unlike yourself, I had the blessing and the curse. I hardly ever hear lyrics. It's the music. The music speaks to me, and it's what gets me. And it's funny because there's been tunes that I've listened to years later, and when I finally listen to the lyrics, I'm like, well, that's what that was saying. I mean, like really.
I know.
I love this song, and I've always loved it, but I never really knew what it was about until like, oh, you know, kind of classic in Come Together with the Beatles. The whole bass line is like everything there is to me. Right. It's got so much creepy lyrics and, you know, dark and kind of awful stuff. But I was like, I don't care. I mean, I'm loving the tune and what it's saying and how it's impacting me. So
it's one of those songs. I agree with you 100%. Where like you don't, the lyrics can basically say whatever you want, because you get so enticed in like what's happening with the music, because it's so mysterious, that bass line and everything like that. That's one of those songs. You're right. There are many songs out there that like you know, you're like, I don't even care what he's saying. This is awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like
for sure.
Who's this JoJo? What does it matter? I don't care. You know,
right.
Everything else. Well, and as we move along, how are you getting your sound? What instruments? What are you playing on?
I use mostly Fender products. I love a P bass. I go back and forth between, you know, I have 6 basses, but 7 or something like that. But, you know, you start to lose track. But I always go back to my P bass. Like, it's just a thing. When I record, it's a different story. Like, I'll experiment with, like, I have a 79, the Rickenbacker, and I have an old 74, like, carbon bass that sounds really, like, brushy, like, mid-rangey. But it's hard to fit in a song these days, in this day and age. You know what I mean? Because it's so knobby that I need, especially in a trio, like you mentioned, I need a I need a bass that can have that bottom end and still the mid range too to fill out that fullness, you know. So P bass is my answer to that, and I use a number of P basses, and I have a Fender Elite P bass. That's a newer version that I use. That's pretty much my go-to, and Elite Jazz bass. Those are my go-tos. I have a few Music Mans, but I just always go back to the P bass. I use orange amps. Yeah, I love the orange amps. Ever since I got them, it's been like, for me anyways, it just has this punchy, crystal clear tone to me. It's like, it kind of sounds like how my bass should sound without adding any of my effects. You know what I mean? Which I like about an amp, because I don't need the amp to sound like something else. I just want the sound of my bass almost, you know what I mean? And then to have the balls that it needs, you know, which it does. I use some effects as well. I use a preamp. My Sans amp is always on. I always use a Sans amp. Shout out to Tech 21. Those guys are awesome, and they make great products. I've used the Sans amp for, I mean, it's probably been at least 10 years, but now I have a programmable like Sans amp, so I've got multiple settings. I use it as a preamp, so it's always on. And that's my main preamp.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That goes through my tone. And then I have a couple dark glass pedals that I use for distortion, overdrive, that are great. I think it's the Alpha Omicron, I think is that Omicron.
Okay.
And then I can't remember what the other one is, but they're you know, are you familiar with the dark?
Oh, they've got a bunch of very cool stuff.
Good. They're very good stuff. And I use that for like a lot of distortion. And other than that, I have, you know, another thing that's always on is best pedal that I added to my board is Origin Effects. Okay. It's the compressor. It's their stacked edition compressor. It's got two compressors in one. I'm not a fan of always having a pedal, like a compressor on my board, but I bought one. Alex he was from Orange, now he's working with them. I was checking them out, and I was like, you know, maybe I'll try one. I just saw a bunch of videos, and they sounded great. And I bought one, and I put it on my baseboard, and I was like, I'll tell you what, I don't ever turn it off. It sounds so good for a pedal edition. You know, it's relatively inexpensive for a very, very decent compressor. Nice. Very good. I wouldn't say decent. I would say very great compressor. That's always on, too. I always leave that on. So and that goes like first in my chain. I go out of my tuner right into my compressor. And then out of that, you know, I have a few other effects as well, but you know, chorus, I have like an auto wah, you know what I mean? Things like that. Yeah. Essentials for a bass player. I think everybody needs a little wah, a little funk, you know what I mean? Yeah. And, you know, a little bass chorus is always great, you know? If you don't know what that sounds like, we'll check out some Nirvana. There's some bass chorus and 90s stuff for sure. But yeah, that's pretty much it, you know what I mean? Like, I like to keep it, I was going to say, relatively simple. It doesn't sound simple when you add all that up, but other than that, man, yeah, I don't like to change too much. I found my tone, and now I kind of keep it how it is. Nice. And do you have a preference in strings? I do. I used DR for a while, but now I've been with Ernie Ball for, I mean, I guess probably 5-6 years now. Nice. And I use a combination of their strings because we use multiple tunings. So one song will be in E standard, one will be in E flat, and then another song will be in, you know, drop D or D standard. So I have to set my tunings in my basses accordingly, you know, to, you know, for songs, you know. Yeah. I have to set them up differently. So certain strings have different gauges on them. But other than that, yeah, man, the slinkies, super slinkies, hybrid slinkies, stuff like that. But that's pretty much it. The Ernie Ball has never steered me wrong before. Nice. Well, and as we look ahead, we're coming on hopefully the very tail end of the pandemic. I say hopefully because you never know. Once you thought it was safe, they suck you back in. I know. But I know. What plans are there for the future? What's in the works for the Black Moods? Well, we just got off a little run that we ran through. We did like a 2-week run through like Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, and then back to Phoenix. And then now we have shows in Mexico. We leave tomorrow, and we're down in Mexico until next Tuesday. So we have three or four shows down in Mexico this week. And then we come back, and we kind of do a little run of Arizona before we leave for the summer. We'll do Mexico, which is, you know, pretty close to the border. We'll be right near the border, kind of in Mexico area, Arizona area. Tucson, Pine Top, and then Prescott, Arizona, and then we're going back up to the Midwest again. So we'll be touring through the U.S. throughout the year, and then hopefully go up through Canada and the U.K. next year.
Very nice. And if people want to know where you're going to be or keep on top of it, theblackmoods.com.
Blackmoods.com, yeah. Everything that you can imagine is attached to that. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, you know what I mean? You can listen to the new album there. You can go to Spotify from there to listen to the new album. I would recommend going to theblackmoods.com.
Excellent. Well, Jordan, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. We'll let you get ready to pack for your trip to Mexico. Folks, you've seen him here, Jordan Hoffman on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thank you very much.